Hey, this is going to talk a little bit about just an intro to assessment, talking about a measurement evaluation. Um, just some things to think about, first of all, when you talk about assessment and evaluation. You want to talk about reliability, knowing what that means, validity, what does that mean, criterion reference versus norm referenced, standardized tests. You talk about selected response, constructed response, dealing with standardized tests. You want to be familiar with issues that relate to special needs, 504, LEPs, um, accommodations, modifications, if they have an IEP, just looking at those types of things and knowing what they are and how to appropriately use those terms is an important part of assessment. Another thing is purposes of assessment. There are different purposes for assessment, and when I go through these, I want you to think about, what are these purposes and why are they purposes of assessment. One is certify student learning, which is, did they learn what we taught them? Another one is planning, and within planning you have summative and you have formative. Summative assessment is what you do at the end. That is a formal assessment. That is giving a grade. Summative is just the opposite to formative. Sorry, had a blank moment. Formative is informal, and that is exactly what it sounds like. It's informal. It informally tells you what is going on, if the students are learning along the way, if they're having any kind of difficulties, what's going on. So it's best to do a lot of informal and a few formal. That way they feel comfortable when they get to the formal assessment. You have prediction, you have feedback, you have motivation, and you have research. They're all purposes of assessment and they have different reasons. So it's a good thing for you to stop and think, why would motivation be a purpose of assessment? Why would research be a purpose? Feedback? Why do we need feedback? Why is it related to assessment? So those are some things to think about when you hear those terms. High stakes. That is something that you deal with when you talk about assessments and evaluation. High stakes refers to the use of tests and assessments to make decisions that are of prominent educational, financial, and social impact. So it impacts finances, it impacts society. Things to think about with high stakes. Will a student be promoted to the next grade? Will a teacher receive an incentive? Will the state take over or take control? Will the teacher be offered a contract? Those are all things that have high stakes implications on them. When you have your yearly reviews, those are some things to think about that your principals may think about. Another thing when you're talking about assessment, there are 5 steps that I like to call steps in assessing your students. The first step to assessing your students is to identify your instructional goals and objectives. If you don't know what your goals and objectives are, you cannot teach a lesson or a unit or anything else to students and expect them to learn something if you don't have something to reach or to achieve. In a minute, we're going to talk about, in the next video, we're going to talk about the difference between goals and objectives. You have to know what the differences are, and you have to know what a good goal is and a good objective, and how do you write a good objective so that you can reach that objective. The second thing you have to do is pre-assess your students' needs. How do you do that? Any type of pre-assessment. Informal, question answering, KWL charts, pair share, exit slips, Venn diagrams, just discussion, things like that. After you do that, then you provide relevant instruction. You have to actually teach the lesson in order for them to learn something. So while you're providing relevant instruction, the thing for you to do is to monitor their learning progress. This is going to be where you can figure out if they're having learning difficulties, if they're not understanding. This is a time for you to to include some progress monitoring, some response to intervention, whether it's with your ESL students or if it's with your special needs students or just a student that's having a little bit of difficulty. This is the time that you can do that, whether it's whole group, small group, and really it's response to instruction. How can you change instruction to meet the needs of all of your students? And that's what you want to do. Some examples, especially if you guys are part of Dr. Spazzini's classes, you're very well aware, I'm sure, of some of the accommodations that you can do for ESL kids that is great for all kids. Whether it's graphic organizers, whether it's using the dictionary, whether it's pair share, whether it's sheltered instruction, the KWL chart, using graphics, using visual aids, videos, anything like that that can enhance their learning experience. Then you want to assess the outcomes, assess those goals or those objectives. Did they learn what you intended for them to learn? Was there improvement based on learning or based on instruction? Then after you assess, the most important step is the last one, which is using those results or evaluate. Evaluation is very important. You cannot evaluate without assessment. You can assess and not evaluate. You can give them a test every day of the week and it not mean anything. But if you want to have meaningful evaluation, you've got to assess and then you've got to evaluate it. You've got to figure out, how do I use these results? What am I going to use them for? What am I going to do based on these results? What do these results mean? So those are some things that you need to think about as you're reading through this content for the first lesson. And then the next clip I'm going to talk about deals with planning for instruction and your tests.